taking the time out today to join us for what I know is going to be a robust and interesting conversation. Before I get the rest of the conversation under the way, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Robin Pasensi. I am the Parliamentary Project Manager at the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, and I will be the facilitator slash moderator of today's webinar. As I'm sure all of you are aware, but I will repeat that today's webinar, we are bringing together a broad variety of experts from civil society, parliament, advocates, and activists um, to discuss the International Day of Parliament. That was on the 30th of June. It's a day that was started by the United Nations in commemoration of the Interparliamentary Union that started in 1889. And the UN really recognized, I think, the need to reflect critically, objectively, but also in praise of the work that parliaments globally do. And as we are all aware, that we are in an exceptionally heightened political moment. And I don't think there is a better time to really talk about what Parliament is and does for the public and vice versa than on this day of the International Day of Parliament. So, the theme of our discussion here today is really around citizen engagement and citizen participation. I think just broadly, public engagement and public participation with the institution that we know to be as Parliament. We have lined up for you an excellent array of speakers, but before I get into who our speakers are, I just want to give you a brief idea of how this session will work and just a little bit of house rules. So, following my little welcome and introduction, I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists. They will introduce themselves, their organizations, but more specifically, what they are going to do is provide a very brief and succinct sort of opening statement that speaks to our theme of citizen engagement and participation. Following those brief opening statements, we are going to have a longer guided conversation. And here I'm going to put to our panelists about 3 to 4 broad but still pointed questions that speak to the theme that we have here this afternoon. And then following that, we are hopefully going to have an excellent Q&A session. Now, we have all been a part of many webinars, and as I'm sure everybody knows, time is always of the essence. So we're going to try and keep our Q&A session to about 10, possibly 15 minutes, time dependent. So in terms of those house rules that I spoke of, if you have any questions throughout the duration of this webinar, please pop it in the chat. The chat box is being monitored. We will be taking note of those questions, and when it comes time for that Q&A, I will pull a set of questions from there as well. Just so you know, in thanks for your participation, today you will be receiving a follow-up email, and for any questions that we are unable to get to during today's session will be responded to in writing with that follow-up email. So fear not, if we don't have time to get your question here today, you will receive a response via email. So without further ado, let me just whet your appetite a little bit by introducing who our panel is. So first up, we have from Open Secrets, Letogonolo Letsele. She has a keen interest in human rights, democracy, and governance, and she works as a campaigner at Open Secrets. Before joining Open Secrets, she was the electoral systems researcher at My Vote Counts, my former workplace as well. So it's great to have a former colleague on board. Next, we have Indodana Gadebe of the Civil Society Unmuted Coalition South Africa. In this position, he promotes social justice, defends the rights of the homeless, and contributes to a vibrant civil society voice in South Africa. Welcome, Indodana. Next, we have Samantha Waterhouse, who is the operations manager at Equal Education. And I'm sure Equal Education needs no introduction. But for those who are unaware, it is a social movement of high school learners working through democratic engagement and activism to achieve education justice in South Africa. And I'm looking forward to what Samantha can give us in terms of insight on that youth voice that I think is so important. And then rounding out our four-person panel is Mr. Brent Simons, who is the Unit Manager Information and Content Development of the Public Participation Task Team at Parliament. That really was a mouthful, Mr. Simons. I hope I've captured that correctly. And I'm sure, again, you will be able to provide us with some excellent insight in terms of public participation. But I think that's enough from me. I think in the order in which I introduced you, so that's Lithogonolo, then Indodana, then Samantha, and then lastly Brent, I will ask you just to do your introductions and your opening statements, and then we can get into the discussions. So over to you, Lithogonolo.
Thank you very much, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me here. So, just as Robin introduced, my name is Lithogonolo Letsile. I am a campaigner at Open Secrets. Just a little bit about Open Secrets. We are a non-profit organization which exposes economic crime, but predominantly in the private sector. So, how we do this is through investigations, through litigation when required, and lastly through advocacy, which is where my work usually intersects with Parliament. Also, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Sam, who's on the panel. She's introduced me to this work about 5 years ago. So I hope I make you proud. But just my initial remarks regarding this topic is that I want to start by saying that public participation by Parliament is a constitutional obligation. Before even going anywhere, it's really something that's mandated. It's not something where it's a process or it's a mechanism or what. It's a fundamental constitutional obligations. So you have instances where legislative processes can be actually turned down or can be critiqued on the basis that there was no adequate public participation. So I just want us to understand, the importance of public participation in Parliament and in what we're discussing today. But like maybe just to also add that both Parliament and citizens have a role to play in public participation, and I think it's something that I can break down a little later. So yeah, that's my brief overview, Robin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Indodana, your comments?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm having an issue with my network this side, but we are coping. My name is Ndota Nahatebe. I'm from the Civil Society and Media Coalition of South Africa, recently launched in 2022 when they saw there was a gap in the civil society space, that there was no strong civil society around South Africa. So when we launched in 2022, then 2023, we had our first conference where we then became a civil society registered as well, recently in 2025. Just 2023. So our work is basically, I've been delegated as the national deputy chairperson, soon to be deputy president, because we don't know representative up to district level. So we believe also as society admitted that Parliament can be efficiently engaged through citizenship. The citizens could include themselves in participation in transparency, maybe accountability. We advocate for regular public hearings, maybe accessible feedback to mechanisms, accessible to everybody. And also the citizen to lead oversight, because this is their parliament, so they should be able to go inside and participate in the public participation. So our work basically is going to be an oversight where we will monitor all the ministries, will monitor from provincial level, will make sure that we are in parliament at all times to just oversee that the work is being done. If it's not done, we'll be there. Our mandate is very clear. We are there for the citizens and civil society. Thank you so much. That's my 2 cents of today.
Thank you so much.
I apologize for that. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much. Samantha?
Thank you. Yes. So perhaps just a bit about me. Although I'm currently in an operational role at EE, I'm here because for many years I worked in the space of democracy and specifically the role of legislatures there. So that was work, I mean, from 99 actually on a lot of law reform processes, but moving from 2010 specifically into understanding how to strengthen the democratic function of our legislatures in the scheme of things. And just to note that we worked on the projects where Lithogonolo and I met on Parliament Watch, and there was another project that was about trying to get more community-oriented and social movement-oriented activists able to engage in the legislatures as well. And then I did want to say that, and you'll see it in the questions, we're generally aware of the lawmaking, the oversight, the transparency and openness requirements on the legislatures. My interest is really understanding how to give life to their central role, the main thing that they're there to do, which is to ensure that there is a government that is based on the will of the people. And what that means in practice, what that means in these other functions and how they play out, because all the other functions should be directed by that core role that the Constitution says, which is the will of the people and the majority, with an emphasis on those who are vulnerable, previously excluded, and continuously excluded. Are those voices the voices that are centered, and their will, is it coming through? Also, in terms of this idea, I notice in our conversations, we talk about the legislatures as if they're the end of the road with accountability. So we'll hear that the executive must account to the legislatures. But actually, if you understand the Constitution, the role is that the executive accounts to the public via the legislatures. And that's quite an important point as well, because it means that the thing the legislatures must achieve is public accountability. And so when we get into those conversations, I think it's quite material. Last comment is just to highlight somebody else's words. It's the court in the UDM matter. And I had to pick one. It talks about the roles and the functions of the legislatures and says not practical for 55 million of us to assume governance responsibilities. ... We, the people, designated messengers or servants to run our constitutional errands for the common good of us all. These servants are supposed to exercise the power and control the enormous resources at the beck and call of the people. This is not only because they were elected through their parties to represent people, but also to enable the people to govern through them. And so I think that's making the point of what the purpose of the legislatures are. And it asks us then very practically to think about how we make that real in the day-to-day, rather than this idea that the legislatures are the end point. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. I think you've already provided some excellent provocations for us before we get into our discussion. But before then, Brent, if you would provide us with some of your initial thoughts.
No, thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. I think it's important to note that the fellow panel members are basically outlined the primary function of Parliament, and that is to represent the people, scrutinizing the executive on behalf of the citizens, and obviously making laws. But those laws cannot be made without input received from citizens. The scrutinizing of the performance of the executive cannot entirely be left to the 400 members of Parliament, including both the NA and the NCOP. That civil society has a very, very keen role to play in that. And that is why Parliament makes it very clear that our mandate as Parliament is to facilitate public involvement in the legislative process, ensuring that citizens are given that opportunity, as outlined by various court rulings, to meaningfully influence not only the legislation that we are about to pass, but also to influence and to get your member of Parliament to represent your views, because technically it is impossible for each and every South African citizen to have their voice heard in the legislature. And that is why the member of Parliament also plays a very, very, very strategic role in bringing that voice from the constituency into the parliamentary platform, whether it's in the NCOP or whether it is in the National Assembly. So we view public participation as a cornerstone of our democracy, that as an institution, you would have seen, following these court judgments, we started restructuring public participation at Parliament. We recently appointed a section manager to head up that section called public participation. And part of their responsibility would be to ensure, again, that not only are South Africans provided with an opportunity to influence legislation, but also provided with an educational platform where Parliament goes out. And we're hoping, following these discussions today and the discussions as we move forward, that we do this in partnership, ourselves and civil society organizations, educating and informing citizens on the very important role that citizens must play to ensure that Parliament does its work effectively and efficiently. I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let me just say it's exceptionally heartening to hear that I think for most of us here, what we are trying to center is this idea of a politics for the people, a parliament, a democracy for and by the people, and how do we actually do that? And obviously, in today's discussion, we're going to be centering it on one particular institution, which is Parliament, but I think which we all also understand is not the only space in which democracy or politics unfolds. But I think just to get the conversation started, I'm just going to put out the first question, initial question, and I will just ask the panelists as you feel. Please unmute yourself, respond. Feel free if you want to tack on a follow-up question or comment to what has been asked, please feel free to do so. But I think, particularly given Samantha's comments, I do want to hone in firstly on this idea of youth participation and what do we mean by that. And I think it's not a secret that on the continent here in Africa, youth make up the largest majority of people. Youth are a key driver of social change and innovation, and we are always particularly concerned about what does the youth want? Where is the youth voice? Following on from our national elections last year, we've also seen, I think, a rise in young MPs that are currently now in Parliament. And I think given this context, how do you think the involvement of youth in Parliament, specifically, but maybe more broadly in democracy, can change or enhance the work and the view of the institution itself, particularly given the opening statements that you've made? Where do you see the youth coming in and mitigating some of those concerns that you may have had? Now I see my panelists are quiet, and unfortunately now I'm going to have to be like a teacher, and because I very much would like to hear Sam's thoughts, particularly coming from equal education. We'll start with you, Sam, and then we'll hope the rest of our colleagues will fall in. I see your hand, Brent, as well. Maybe we'll come to you after Sam.
Thanks, Robin. I am so not youth. That's why it's not. I'm staring at Lehonganolo. Like, come on, sister. I'm very grey. And in respect of EE, I mean, I'll try and represent what our comrades, members have reflected. I do not fulfill the same role in EE that I've fulfilled in other places, just to be aware of that. I did want to also just start with some of the language. It's stepping back, not on youth specific, but just this idea that led by citizens and engage with citizens.
Yes.
Note the Constitution's actually quite clear in the provisions around the legislatures to talk about the public. There are very specific definitions and times in the Constitution where citizens only are factored. So just to be mindful of why we use that word, the public, and the duty is not just to people who are card-carrying South Africans, so to speak. And then just also to say from EE's side, we're working majority with youth who are in high school and under the age of 18. And so the questions there are very much around the engagement of young people and building a culture of, not a culture, there's a solid culture of political engagement, despite the other argument that's saying our youth are apathetic. And I think that we got great tension on those things. And certainly if you're in EE, all you see are very politically engaged young people. But no difficulty finding members either. But there the issue is, how do those humans be taken seriously when it comes time to talk about democracy in the context of voting age being 18? So we've got quite a lovely, like it's a signal sign now, we vote with our voices, that we don't have to make an X. And that speaks to the fact that South Africa is a participatory democracy. And yes, in the elections process, there's some layers and levels that exclude people from voting, but there are no exclusions by age on publics or youth engaging in the political process. So I wanted to say that first. Also wanted to say, and it'll link to some of the comments on public participation, it's a breadth of engagement. So young people when we get to the public participation stuff, to try and shoehorn people into Parliament, the institutions, the colonial institutions' way of practicing its work is counterintuitive to allowing for the engagement to happen on the terms of the public. And it's not just in terms of children or young people. And then just to also say that there is, the incubators of political engagement tend to start at university level. And why EE is important, or the kind of work that EE does, there are others that do it as well, is because it's incubating before university. And it means that those who are not accessing tertiary education, and therefore those kinds of political spaces that lead to movement, are able to start accessing it at school level. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking.
No, not at all. I just want to say, I think first and foremost, you're absolutely right. The language that we use is important for how we frame the conversation. And I think you're right. We are talking about the public. We're talking about the people who live here, who are living under sort of this particular political dispensation. And that is not only confined to those who we are, say, are citizens. It's everybody who is here. So I think that's a good way of framing the discussion that we have. And I think also what you have highlighted, and hopefully we can continue to touch on, was this point of inherited systems, inherited colonial political systems of engagement, and what does it actually mean for us? Particularly now when we reflect on 30 years of democracy, it's also another inherited system that we are working with, that we are trying to change, and perhaps we need to relook. But I think your comments around sort of incubating before university, talking about how do we engage with, as you I think rightly point out, are already politically aware people. They just happen to be under the age of 18. And I think that's another conversation about how do we move political engagement beyond the ballot box. But Brent, you had a hand, and I'm sure you have some comments for us.
Yes, no, thank you. And I think I actually want to expand a bit on what Samantha said as well, because you see, at Parliament, we have identified our tertiary institutions as target institutions to educate our up and coming future economically active citizens. But we also have that large category of unemployed youth. And we then said, okay, who do we partner with within South Africa to target schools as an institution, for example? Because we're saying that the education of our future productive South Africans should not be restricted to a tertiary institution. And that is why with the IEC, for example, we are now embarking on educational programs at school levels. We did it in the Eastern Cape. We're busy in the Western Cape. We have that national agreement that we are now formalizing. We're going into the Northern Cape and all other provinces of the country we are going to go into. But as an institution, I just want to remind panel members as well as the participants that just this month, Parliament identified youth as a key role player in resolving the problems that we are facing as a country. We're saying that as an institution that we cannot find serious solutions for the South African economy, for jobs, for dealing with unemployment, for the international crisis that we are facing, if the youth do not play a particular role in it. And that is why, as an institution, for example, we have what we call our Children's Parliament, which focuses on how do we empower citizens, and how do we empower children to actually influence the legislation that ultimately they will be governed with as normal South African children, as South African adults, etc. And just 2 weeks ago, we had the P20 Youth Parliament, for example. Now this year is going to be a different year because we're having the Children's Parliament. We also had the Youth P20 focused Youth Parliament. And with Blind South Africa, for example, there is this opportunity of introducing the Parliament, Youth Parliament, focusing on youth with disabilities throughout the country. So those projects are progressing, but the emphasis is that as an institution, we're beginning to say that we need to ensure that whatever we do as a country, whatever we do as a institution developing legislation in this country, we make sure that the voice of the youth at least plays a very significant role as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Ndudana, I saw your hand, and I will take your inputs now. But before we head over to the inputs of Ndudana, both Brent and Sam, follow-up questions for you to think about. Since you both are doing work with young people, let's make a slight differentiation between youth and young people, those under the age of 18. Is there anything in your work, particularly Brent, because you mentioned that very recently you have done this, is there something that the youth is spotlighting, one or two things that they see as major issues or impediments to their participation, or what they feel maybe is not a holistic or accurate representation of their needs? And then I think, Brent, more specifically for you, you've mentioned that Parliament has identified that the youth is a key role player. Just some thoughts or ideas. What precisely do we mean by that key role player? Where do we see them actually fitting in? But while you think about a response to that, I will go over to Ndudana and he can provide some inputs. I know you had your hand up.
Thank you so much, Robin. What I wanted to speak about was about the youth engagement, because when we started the Parliament work and I started being delegated by my leadership to be in the public participation in Parliament, we found that a lot of our youth, because we have the Youth Commission in our civil society movement. I think one of the girls who started was Bonolo from Northwest Province. She saw me there and then she started engaging and being interested, and she just started joining online those participation. Then I realized in the Western Cape, there's quite a lot now who is interested to come in on board to be part of us. So there are now youth interested, because they never knew that the Parliament is accessible to them. They always thought that Parliament is just for the politicians, and then after you vote them in, they go in there and they are not participating anymore. So we found that in our organization, the Youth Commission is very interested, and one of our leaders, Lisa from Eastern Cape, is already been engaging in the also writing to Parliament so that in future they can be part of it. And every time I go to Parliament, they come with me, some of them from the Western Cape as well. So we see that they are now having interest in that because they see that we can participate in our Parliament. And it is open for everyone. And thanks to Brent, also who's in the Parliament, because it's been encouraging us to really work with Parliament and be closer. So going forward, I think the youth will be more interested if they see us as active citizens going into Parliament, doing something about participating and being there at all times. So they will be very happy. Thank you so much for having me. Otherwise, the youth is interested in our side countrywide. I'm not talking only here in the Western Cape, because we are all representing all 9 provinces. So all of the youth, some of them, especially Gauteng, they already want to be part of that youth parliament. So I'll be engaging them and making sure going forward they'll be part of that. We find that they are now interested in Parliament, which it was never a case before.
Thank you, Ndudan. And I think you've also highlighted perhaps a key issue is that if you have a perception of the inaccessibility of an institution like Parliament, you may be less likely to be wanting to participate, and also just unaware of those initiatives that people like Brent are trying to get off the ground. But before I circle back to those follow-up questions that I had for Brent and Sam, I'm going to take your hand, Lekgogonolo, and hopefully you can help continue to steer the conversation.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm going to be a bit cautious as a young person myself, but I just want to say that there are multiple factors that contribute to how Parliament is functioning now and why it's functioning that way. And I think we need to be fair and have a balanced conversation. I think most importantly, if you remember, the COVID pandemic was one of the triggers that actually helped shape how Parliament is today. The parliamentarians couldn't meet and have their fancy breakfast and lunch and everything of that nature, so they were forced to meet virtually. So that was a really big move on Parliament side to to have it going to the people. So they had virtual meetings. Civil society started making virtual submissions. I remember we worked on this, trying hard, like early 2020. So COVID really contributed to Parliament going to the people and being online. And then what we're seeing since the 2024 elections now is that portfolio committees are starting to behave quite differently. And this is because we are having MPs from different political parties. So it's quite competitive, it's quite robust. And everybody wants to perform for people. So that's like another reason. But I guess maybe where the youth element can come in, and we see it, is that the youth are vibrant in these portfolio committees. They roast these MPs. The language is strong, it's abrasive, it's appealing to the youth, and people like to see that. And please excuse me. And also the conduct in those portfolio committees really draws social media attention to the youth and wanting to engage in parliament. I think you would remember recently the portfolio committee that's overseeing, I think it's the sports department, and then there was an issue with SAFA, and people were very interested to know what's happening, and it's mostly the youth, and also with what's happening now with the higher education portfolio, it's the youth that are MPs that are driving that, and also it's relating very well to the youth that's outside. So we are essentially benefiting from parliamentarians being youth and being in parliament, but I guess it's also based on a plethora of things that have happened and before, and it's actually an ecosystem, but it's baby steps, but I think we are doing quite well.
And I mean, I think that's excellent. I think you've raised something which obviously we have not yet touched on, which is that there's now a dynamism within how Parliament functions because of the influx of youth voices. But as you also rightly point out, COVID was such a rupture point where it forced not just Parliament, but just, as you say, a plethora of political institutions to really try and understand, well, how can we actually reach people? How can we bring our work to the people? And how can we properly take on board what they want, what they think, what they say into the work that we do? And I think you're absolutely right as well. The sort of political game within Parliament is a lot different with this seventh administration. We are seeing a different level of engagement in portfolio committees, and I think that cohort of young MPs are definitely not taking things lying down, and they are asking questions. And I think it does provide a very clear example of how the youth are pushing the political agendas that are closest to their hearts. But I just want to sort of close off on this particular thing, and I want to circle back to Brent and Sam about, I mean, I think what Lehono has provided a nice segue of how the youth are in fact participating, and just some of your comments to those follow-up questions that I had.
Not sure who's going. Should I pop? Brent, do you want to come?
I think we'll proceed and then I'll follow.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, look, those are big questions, and I'm mindful of time and talk space. I also think Lehlongonolo's taken us somewhere that's quite linked to this whole thing around the loud message that and this isn't through research, this is through the work and being in the movement with our members, but is this same message of the absolute disconnect in responsiveness and responsibility. And so I think Lehlongonola took us into that space of understanding how some of what's going on because of the increased number of youth in Parliament is increasing some of that engagement. But then I think, the way I've understood over the years Parliament to see itself engaging with young people, and particularly children, so under 18-year-olds, is where it may be going on a site visit to check a school or check something out. So taking place outside of the kind of formal roles, in a sense. It's within the oversight mandate, but it's not in the same way that a committee meeting happens. And our members struggle with getting the space to be in a committee. And I mean our members who are in high school, who are wanting to talk about the consequence of austerity, on deepening the inequality in education, on maintaining a status quo that is effectively it's apartheid status quo in terms of having 4 different streams of education for different people in this country. So the frustration of our membership and of our organization is to be in those formal spaces, to be speaking on equal terms without that patronizing approach that often happens to the children. Thank you for coming and telling us all your things today, and we will listen and we will come back to you. And it's actually not speaking to them. The fact is, not just our members, our young people in this country, they're trying to speak to equals. You are my representative, but kind of being treated like with a pat on the head too often. And that's in a political sense more than I'm talking about just in the systems programming sense. I'll leave it there.
Let me jump in. You see, I know I'm representing Parliament today, but I'm also one of those members of the youth who decided many years ago that the country cannot be allowed to be governed the way it was governed, and made a decision then that we needed a change of government. And eventually, I think our involvement as youth, largely underestimated, contributed towards the democracy we now have in place. And from the youth, you get many different innovative ideas. And I just want to touch on two of them at least. You asked how we could get the youth involved. I think that we have many speeches about the youth, but we don't really have actual mechanisms in place where youth influence legislation in South Africa. And one of the questions that we were asked recently was, why don't you institutionalize your youth parliament like we have mayoral city councils for youngsters, and you have your junior where structures get together, primarily from various schools, youth structures, etc. They elect a mayor, junior mayor for the city of Johannesburg. There's a junior mayor, junior council for the city of Tshwane, for Durban. Even in Cape Town, we recently elected a junior mayor. They sit once a month. We need to ask ourselves, and we do ask ourselves this as officials, is it sufficient to have this youth parliament once a year, maybe every 2 years? Because we do rotate them. We have the children's parliament, then we have a youth parliament, etc. So we need to look at structures like that and the value of it. Now the questions we are asking ourselves, and again, the solutions are not coming from us. They're being proposed by the youth themselves, and that is, you do not need to meet physically. You find us active on the most active age group in South Africa is our youth on social media platforms. Now Parliament is trying to go that direction. And that is why, for example, the Parliament YouTube account has now outperformed the government ZA YouTube account. We are now the most popular. We had almost 3 million videos viewed last year alone. We're standing as the biggest subscriber amongst government institutions in terms of access to our YouTube channels. So people are beginning to watch, and the youth in particular are beginning to watch, because the comment that we see coming in doesn't come from our predominantly elder section of society. It comes from the youth, and they leave statements there. The problem is if we link it to participatory democracy. At the institution, we're trying to develop a mechanism where we say that, look, participation is not one way. Participation is like communications. It's a two-way process. So if someone gives us comment on a social media platform, I can tell you as an institution, we hardly ever respond to any of the comments we received, which means that as an institution, we are actually lacking that interactive aspect of social media platforms. We have a television channel in this country. The youth have asked us, the unemployed youth in particular have asked us to make it available to all South Africans, and there are negotiations currently taking place where as free to air as SABC is to any South African citizen, the channel 4, it should be free to air for each and every South African citizen, meaning that they don't have to then require that DSTV decoder. They can access it the way they access them. We have a community radio studio at Parliament, because when we asked South African citizens, and let me focus again on the youth in particular, when we asked our service provider to do the research, we said we want to know what the youth wants from Parliament. And they said, consult us via radio, consult us via TV, consult us via social media. And that is the direction we are moving into as an institution. But one of my colleagues just reminded me now to say, and that's why I started off with that, saying that we can talk about the youth all we want to, unless we put the mechanisms in place to actually facilitate that interaction, to facilitate their voice being heard. We are going to repeat and repeat this seminar, this conversation, without us taking constructive. And that is why, I mean, I will take it from my side. I will speak to the colleagues at the institution, but I think that as civil society organizations, you need to say, following this seminar, why can't we institutionalize, for example, some virtual youth parliament? So I'm not throwing the ball into your court. I'm saying that we need to work together on this, because as a lone voice, as an official in an institution, the institute, the wheels at the institution turns a bit slowly internally. It takes some time, but if we get requests from civil society organizations to say, perhaps this is how we can partner you in this process, I think it would be a brilliant idea to take forward, because that is not a Brent initiative. It is not an information and content development. That's the voice that we picked up from the youth who have been attending our activities. So there are many things we can do as an institution. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben, for those comments. And I think yourself, Samantha, Lehokunolo, and Ndudana as well, where we've kind of, I think, found ourselves in the conversation is that we are all coming to the point of the importance of public participation. I know we've centered the conversation more specifically around youth, but the public at large wants to know what's happening. And I think Lehokunolo provided a very nice overview of, given the last 5 years, we are at a very important critical juncture that's, I think, decidedly different from anything that we have known before. And I think you've kind of thrown down the gauntlet there, Brent, in asking the question about, well, how can we actually collaborate? And I'd like to follow up on that to the panelists, is that when we think about public participation, I don't think we have to wax any more lyrical about how important it is that you become involved in the work and the life of Parliament. But if you could highlight a mechanism, something that you think we should hone in on to actually increase that public participation, whether that be from Parliament side, and maybe that's more for you, Brent, working within the institution, or whether that be from the side of civil society. Just one or two things. What do you think we can actually do to increase that public participation, given the issues that we've already highlighted here? And perhaps since you are first on my screen, Lekokonolo, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, not a problem. Remember when I was starting earlier, I had said that, it's both the responsibility of Parliament and to an extent as citizens to understand how, public participation works in Parliament. Look, I don't think we need to, have an innovation or change anything. Public participation through public hearings is still the best, but Parliament just needs to do it properly. These happen like when there's like a bill that has been tabled and the Parliament goes around getting views of the public on those bills. But what happens is that there's limited notice on these meetings. People don't engage properly because they don't have information. Remember, some of these bills and the legislations are quite complex. When someone says NHI and ballot, it's these big words. People do not have the opportunity to engage properly because they don't understand the content. So that's on Parliament to do. And another thing, I think Brent also touched on this. It's Parliament also engaging in education and awareness. I don't know, maybe they could have TV or roadshows or something. Teach us about how Parliament works. Teach us what are you doing every single day. Some people are only even learning about portfolio committees now because they are popping up on Twitter. They didn't understand that it was that's part of the law making process. It starts from a bill being tabled from the executive or from an MPs, goes through portfolio committees and then the different houses, things like that. People need to understand those things, and I think it's the responsibility of Parliament to teach. But I guess also on us again, the most important, and I think it's a difficult one, it's on civic education, understanding what's Parliament's role and what's our role and who's who, in the whole ecosystem of democracy and decision making. We need to also be active and attend these meetings, these public hearings, and also take part in these making of these legislation. For example, when laws when bills are tabled, like public procurement, NPA, and things like that. And this is the space that civil society has been doing quite well in it, because that's where we see civil society making contributions to these bills, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But the public doesn't really feature in the space. It's mostly civil society, so we need to find a way of including everybody else. And yeah, I guess we need to understand it as a two-way process, where Parliament has its responsibility to do public education, do public hearings, but also us as citizens, doing our part and attending to these things.
Thank you. I think, Brinty, you will be in the hot seat representing the entirety of Parliament with some of these comments. As Legogonola says, you have to do things properly. So we'll leave you for last, Brent. Maybe you can provide some overall input there. But perhaps, Indodana, if we can get your comments, what do you think about the mechanisms, maybe one or two, about actually increasing public participation, given what we've mentioned here today?
Yeah, thank you so much. What we did after we launched, we were sponsored by our sponsors, which is Kagiso Trust. They did a democracy training just before the elections. So we went to do trainings for people to see how Parliament works and also being active citizens. So we went countrywide. It was done for every district. We could meet there and train people about how to vote with the new way of voting, which we were doing. In that moment, we immediately took advantage of how to train the people how Parliament works and how people can learn how the things of Parliament can be involved. That's how I end up getting involved in Parliament. And then I got to meet you, Robin, I got to meet Brad, and we had more information from that side onward. So going forward, then we decided to do something which is very diverse. And then we started the capacity building, mixing together with civil society. So with this national dialogue coming up now, this is the opportunity for us to mix together to say, to teach the people maybe how Parliament works, because then that is the side of ourselves as citizens and also as civil society. But on Parliament, it's just to provide oversight, maybe through radio, through advertising, like you say. TV now, everyone is on social media. Social media will be one of the greatest things to be done, just to give that awareness of that Parliament belongs to the people. People always think that those in Parliament are the ones who belong there. So when you say Parliament, you say, but I'm not voted in, so I can't be participating in Parliament. But not knowing that the oversight is that then we can be also participating there. So my oversight is just to say this, maybe this new national dialogue coming up will be the best time for us to train the citizens. That information is very important because some people never know information. Without information, people never know. They will be on the outside. It will also encourage.
I'm so sorry, Indodana. I think we may have lost you due to your connection. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, particularly given the slant of your organization. It's really focused, and I think Leo Honoro also mentioned this, that this is a two-way street of Parliament being involved in advertising, civic education, but also for civil society and just the public at large to also be engaged, I think, in the sort of ongoing learning process. But I think maybe as we continue to think through this, I don't know if we'll have time to actually get into the weeds of this discussion, because we still want to get to the Q&As. But perhaps if I could play devil's advocate a little bit and to pick up on something that Samantha had said earlier about inherited political institutions, particularly living in the legacy or the shadow of colonialism and colonial political institutions. We are shoehorned into a particular kind of democratic dispensation and what that means for the kind of political institutions that it brings. And that may not take into account how we actually as a people engage politically. And perhaps as we have this conversation about how do you engage with an institution like Parliament, we should also take into account, well, how is it that people just generally want to engage with their systems of power, with their politics, and see how that side by side. And with my little segue, I think I'm just going to, Sam, if there are any comments that you have around this sort of public participation mechanisms that we're talking about before I hand over to Brent to respond to some of the issues that have come out with Parliament itself.
Thanks, Robin. And I'm sorry, I have the most disruptive dog today. And that's why I have to keep switching my screen off. I'm working from home. So I do apologize, but I'm listening at all times. Yeah, look, I really like this thing around our dual responsibility. We did a book, a bunch of organizations like in 2010 or 11 called Not Waiting for an Invitation. And it's this idea of centering the duty to claim the legislatures amongst the publics and in civil society and so on. Noting something Letlhongonolo mentioned, which is this kind of, when we talk about public participation or engagement through legislatures, to be thinking about the fact that publics is a plural, not homogeneous, so very different groups. So you've got from your unions and your NGOs to local activists operating in a rural space, very different groups of people, and each needing, we talked about youth, each needing targeted strategies, targeted mechanisms. You can use your spray and pray, and what we're going to see is this consistent replication of an NGOized and a union space. Those are the publics who get their own private sector with the money to drive their things. So there's really questions around the practical ways we do things. I wanted to talk a little bit about the politics. So we've got a lot of ideas and they're written up, and we're listening to Brent talk through some of the movement. I think Letlhongonolo mentioned in 2020, we're doing stuff, and Brent, you're finally talking about making it free to air channel. So like there's a lot there around the methods or the mechanisms for access. My point on that is tailor it. Think about different targets and think about what you need to do to get the Gogos in that community in Mpumalanga access to this information. That's what is needed rather than just this blanket approach. But there's this bigger task which goes to what you're picking up on, Robin, which is that the bigger issue is addressing the disconnect in the politics of the space, right? So you may tell me I can come to Parliament, but then I come in there and there's a whole set of rules. Who can speak when? We all know how many people have come to us shocked that they can't speak in a committee. It's a normal assumption for people that in a public space they can speak, except no one in Parliament or those of us who've been around the block and we're cool, we know Parliament. So there are things like that that really, really undermine the engagement in the committees. So we see take Parliament to the people, there'll be a different mode, but we need that space in committees as well. That is the kind of thing that then is preventing people who are deeply knowledgeable. In our work with community activists from various contexts, urban, rural, and peri-urban contexts, what we had deeply intelligent people saying, I walk into the space and the fact that I don't have a degree and I'm not wearing a fancy, expensive suit is making it very difficult for me to speak. So there's all that psychology that comes into play because of the way the institution is. And then my frustration, my love of people like Brent and other colleagues who are here, who have held with, I see Jackie Thomas is here, held such a strong level of accountability to the public and a belief in it, in the public participation. But it's political. So then, and I know nobody here can say it, but I know from my conversations with colleagues in those spaces, you've got a political mandate that comes from the ruling party or whoever's got dominance in a particular space saying, no. So that's part of what's going on. And the public shouldn't be, we need to not be naive to that. We need to understand that there's a functional kind of departmental role, and then there's a political thing that's happening. And our intention is, yes, to play nice by the rules and be friends with Brent and Jackie and others of, in your positions. But actually what we're trying to do is get our political leadership to hear us in terms of what our experiences are. And so for that reason, I think the kind of public engagement or the public civic education we're doing needs to be constantly saying it's political. I'll never forget, it was Ms. Alison Tilley many, many years ago saying to a group of us, it's politics, stupid. I don't know, those of you who know how she'll speak. It wasn't disrespectful. But because we were talking about make a relationship with a committee secretary and get hold of the program, she's like, get in on the politics too. Stop there.
I think that's an excellent place to, I won't say stop, but to allow Brent to pick up on from. And I just want to say, I think you are absolutely right. And you provided something that I think was very insightful, which is that the public, everyone at large, we are not one homogenous group. We operate in different groups, different classes. And I use that word very intentionally, because that is the system that we have. And for many years, it has been designed to keep people separate and to try and now bring us together to have this conversation on, as you very rightly point out, politics. Politics is life, it's everywhere. And this is how we need to engage. It's exceptionally complex. And I think you provided a very nice overview of that. But I do want us to get into some of the questions as well. So, Brent, if I can just let you have some of the final words on what we've said here and maybe respond to some things that some of the colleagues have leveled, and then we'll head over into the Q&A.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for that. I want to continue with the due responsibility, but I want to emphasize that ownership of Parliament does not belong to the political parties who are in Parliament. Ownership must belong to the citizens of this country. And the only way you're going to really give life to that concept is if civil society organizations, not Parliament, civil society organizations begin to play that role that they need to play in terms of educating, informing, consulting, and raising the voice of citizens in the institution. And I think OUTA has been doing that extensively since I started working with OUTA. So the only one who can claim Parliament as theirs can be the citizens. If they can't do it directly, they're supposed to do it through their parliaments. But I see there are questions on the chat, people raising questions about how do you then, the problem starts with how MPs are selected. And unfortunately, that is the type of democracy that we have, that political parties nominate their own. We don't have a constituency electoral setup in South Africa, but that's something for another discussion. I think Safia also raised the issue about Parliament being event-based, and I used to say that the problem with Parliament is that it is seasonal. So we know what to expect in the second quarter. We know what to expect in the fourth quarter. And by the end of the fourth quarter, we start planning for the next 4 quarters. And then what do we use? We use the, not the agendas, but the diaries that we had for the previous 20 years of first quarter, second quarter, third. I think we need to change that type of setup. The people who can help us change that would be our youth coming in with particular issues. And that's what I'm saying. I think that promoting the idea of a youth parliament that sits once per month and how that can work, that's an idea that the youth are looking at. But I can tell you there's no formal structure that has come to Parliament to say, can we deal with this issue, or can we make a formal proposal on this issue? And I don't think Parliament is going to say, no, you can't. We have to come up with those ideas in terms of how we are going to make it work. Now, one of the colleagues on the group chat, they also gave examples of Free South Africa and Dear South Africa. One of the things that we have been trying to do is to replicate Dear South Africa and introduce Dear Parliament, where we will cover all the legislation in front of Parliament. Any citizen who accesses that website will know that this bill is currently in front of a committee. This bill is currently out on public hearings. This is where you can give your input, because even your input, you might not be able to, and we know that, colleagues. That's why, when you mentioned that one of the best mechanisms for public participation remains public hearings, it is indeed so, but it does not reach the numbers of South Africans. And I think our courts have made it clear that we have not reached the number of South Africans that we can, because Parliament is limited. I'll give you an example, KZN. You have 11 districts there. On average, Parliament is going to cover 3 districts. We're trying to get through Ms. Thomas's public education unit to say, do not go to the same districts over and over and over. But unfortunately, the nature of the beast is such that, they're going to, a lion more or less walks the same route, an elephant walks the same route the whole year, repeating, going to the same areas. That is the nature of the beast, that we have fallen into that trap, that we go to the same communities, the same community town halls, and that is where the problems actually start. Because the youth, you asked us earlier, Robin, in terms of what are the key issues. The issues raised by the youth are not different from South Africans. It is unemployment, it is high crime, it is health issues, etc. Which brings me to Samantha's point in the conclusion there, and that was that you need to begin to target. And yes, Parliament realized that we need an audience segmentation model to be developed. I, for a very long time, fought with colleagues in Parliament as an institution because we wanted to call for bids for companies to come and develop an audience segmentation model for us. And I was saying, but the very South African government who reports to Parliament has an audience segmentation model adopted. How would that audience segmentation model be different? Because the poor identified by government is the poor that Parliament also needs to represent. The unemployed identified by government, it is the exact same unemployed that Parliament is representing. The youth that government departments are targeting others. So I don't know if I'm winning that battle at this stage, but I'm saying let's just use government's audience segmentation model because it will save us a couple of million instead of going to get a company to redesign the exact same audience segmentation model and give it to us. So we are moving in that direction, and that is why we're saying that even if you look at our cluster social media accounts for committees, we focus it on youth. And then when we say youth, we don't just say that everyone who is aged between 18 and 35 classify as youth, because even in the youth, you begin to break down those targets. There are those who do have health problems. There are those who have a category we call youth with disabilities, etc. So we do begin to focus our messaging. And that is why my particular unit now, information and content development, works strategically very close with Ms. Thomas's public education unit, as well as with the general public participation section within Parliament. I'm going to leave it there because I think then we can, if we get questions, we can answer those questions a bit more detailed.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brenda. I think you've provided a very nice capstone to the conversation. Of course, an hour is never enough to really get to the meat of topics such as this. But I thank you all for trying to be as concise as possible, trying to spotlight what we think may be some of the issues when we talk about public participation, public engagement. I think it's very clear about this two-way street that we're talking about. How do we actually reach segmented or different parts of the public, of society, to become involved in political life, but also the tensions that exist between what is essentially the mainstream or streamlined official way of doing politics and what exists on the ground with people. I will get into the questions, but just to spotlight that we have already reached our hour, so we're going to maybe spend another 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, doing one or two questions, providing some closing statements. As I said in the beginning, whatever we have not been able to get to in terms of this Q&A, we will provide a written response to. So please don't feel disheartened. We are going to try and pick up those kind of questions. But I'm just going to move on to the Q&A. And I'll tag this for answering live. But we have a question from Stacey van der Walt. And her question is, our country has a representative democratic structure in place. Public participation plays an important role in the structure, and therefore much has been published on the flaws linked to this public participation process. Very little has, however, been published on the flaws linked to the representative democratic process. In other words, when we, the public, manage to convince our MPs of our stance and are then ignored, what then? I think that's probably goes to the heart of many people who want to engage with official structures of the state. We want to make our voices heard. We get on board with what those official things are, but then we don't feel like we actually get the kind of feedback. And I think that was raised in the chat as well. Please feel free to unmute anybody who would like to take that question or provide some comments or follow-ups to that.
Oh.
Indodana, would you like to take the question? I think we may be struggling with your connection.
What did Indodana put there?
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm audible now because my audio has been struggling with it, but I'm
Perhaps
sorry.
if
Next
you
time
could
I'll
your
bring
camera
another
off. I'm so sorry,
because this
Indodana. Perhaps
office
if
is
your
a
camera
different.
off, we can save some bandwidth, and then hopefully we'd be able to hear you a bit better.
Yes, what happens is I'm saying I'll join next time in another office, which is much better. But now, with the question, I'll say there is a way for us to monitor what she's trying to say because there is an app which you guys have launched, the ParliMeter. We haven't touched on that yet, which then monitors those in the legislature to say how they are performing. So I think that will be a very good tool for us to use in future in terms of that. And also another thing, we are in the public participation where the chairpersons come to answer us as citizens about our causes. So that also we do follow-ups to see that they are actually taking our questions to the right and relevant people in Parliament. It has happened. So with that said, I can be testifying now to say, yes, our questions are being dealt with and they are recorded in Parliament. So because I have network issues, I'm just going to stop here. Thank you so much. I'll try to next time connect in a better place. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Indodana. Is there anyone else that would like to provide some insight on that question? Sam, I'm assuming you do. I see you are unmiked,
Yeah, but I just
or unmuted rather.
checking if others want. Yeah, I just wanted to point out again, the legislatures are one mechanism, and that thing is a very common understanding that we go, we raise issues, and then we get nothing, or they push through. And if you look at like laws that have changed where there've been masses of public input in one direction, and Parliament just keeps going in the opposite direction, that is the action of politics. So I think that idea of understanding the inside Parliament and submissions to government and so on spaces, but also the outside mechanisms that are within our democracy, demonstration, social media, that kind of need to understand that when it's a big issue where there's either some kind of popular disjuncture between what the people want and what the parties want, or whether there's money involved, and typically it's got a lot to do with money, we can't just put our eggs in the Parliament basket for change. We've got to keep thinking bigger and keep pushing. And in a sense, although that is unacceptable and frustrating on many levels, there's something about the tensions that it maintains for us in a healthy democracy that's not bad if we're using these other spaces as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, there are mechanisms, and I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier and trying to spot that there's so much happening and that we're trying to communicate, and it's very difficult. And as you mentioned as well, Sam, there are different segments of society that we're trying to communicate these things to, and this is all part of the issue that we have with that feedback. Before I go to the next question, let's do Brent and then Leonolo.
Yeah. No, I just think we also need to remind participants that parliamentary constituency offices are participatory mechanisms, participatory platforms. And as long as citizens do not use those offices to try and get their messages to Parliament, you're going to have a problem, because every Monday in the parliamentary structure is constituency day. In fact, members of Parliament, when it is technically school holidays, members of Parliament are supposed to be very active in their constituencies. So once a week, they need to be active in their constituencies. Citizens need to be told and educated that they can go to their constituency office, raise a particular issue. Next week, Monday, get back to that constituency office and ask the MP, what have you done? Is there a progress report, etc.? And that is part of how you then begin to have this party political constituency offices, beginning to utilize them as a participatory mechanism, but also beginning to tell them that we know your party deployed you here, and therefore you are going to take our issues in this community to Parliament, because we cannot go to Parliament as a citizen, because we are 1,300 kilometers away from Parliament as an institution. But your office, in fact, is a replication, a representative office of parliament in our community. So I think civil society can also contribute towards that, but I've also said that the primary educator on that needs to be parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Nico, you had a hand up as well.
Thank you very much, Robert. I was just going to say sometimes it's almost impossible to influence members of parliament in these committee meetings and also when they are voting, because I mean, I'm going to be very honest, they told the party line. And you know, as much as we voted them into power, but what happens is that they vote according to party lines. And that's just what it is. Like Sam said, it's politics. You know, the other someone on the comments said that they would need to pass a test. For example, when a bill is tabled, they write a test to show that they understand what the bill is about before even voting, because that's what's happened. I'm like, you know, it's funny, but it's not going to be helpful because that's not the point. That's not the basis on which they are voting. They are voting because this is the direction of the party. This is where we want to go, and they do their lobbying thing and things like that. So we really don't get us. We are unable to influence all of that, and unfortunately, we voted for those people, but unfortunately, our vote ended last year. When did we vote? In May, and that was it. Now we have no idea what's happening. We just see budget impasses. There's no transparency. You know, our lack of agency. We don't have a say in what happens. So that's essentially what's happening. And I remember one of the recommendations from Zondo was that Parliament must be more resourced, you know, in terms of its functioning. I'm not too sure if that's really a need because I feel like it's there. It's just that it's the attitude that our MPs have, you know, towards us as citizens. And I guess maybe we need a separate conversation. We need to try and find a way of how to influence those spaces, you know, to be beneficial to us.
Thank you so much. I think you've highlighted something that's also important that moves beyond just what does the institution of parliament do. We're talking about, and I think Samantha also mentioned this, the politics. What is the political will of those who are in the institution and those who are outside of it, who are meant to be represented by those inside of it? How do we actually bring those two together? And just so you know, as you can see, the panelists are looking at what the conversation is like in the chat, and they are all trying to respond to some of that as they give their comments. Unfortunately, I think we perhaps only have time for one more question. So I'm going to pose that question. I'm going to ask the panelists to be as brief as you possibly can. And then also in that same breath, maybe just provide some closing statements around today's conversation. So I am picking these questions at random. I do apologize, but we're trying to make sure that we at least ask one or two of them. And we have a question in the chat from Johann Strauss, who says that the digital divide is real and that we experience great difficulty when doing virtual training of youths in townships. And I'd seen something else in the chat as well, also talking about the issues that come with trying to introduce civic education or other education tools that are online based or digitally based. How can we perhaps overcome this divide? Do you have any kind of tools or access to things that people can use, given some of the issues that we've highlighted? And then, as I said, maybe just one or two sentence wrap up. Maybe I'll start with you, Indodana. I know you've had some issues with your connection. So while it looks good, let's start with you.
Um,
I'm so sorry, Indodana. It looks like your connection is freezing
yeah, I'm back
again.
now. Am I back now? I think I'm back now.
Okay.
So I will say what's important now in this moment. Okay. All right. I'll come back later if you can hear me because okay, I'm back.
No,
Okay.
no
Somehow I don't
problem.
know. I'm in CBD. I mean, actually, it's supposed to be working. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think we can.
Can you hear me? Okay, sure, no
Yes, we can
problem.
hear
I'll
you.
go ahead. So the gap is because, yes, the gap is because at the township level, a lot of our youth are using the data for something which is to play Facebook and all of that, instead of using the data for research and better. We need to provide at least some platforms where we have some places where they can go and then have access to free data. Then they can use that data to do this kind of work. Especially here in Observatory, the place where they can go other places. But then in the townships, there is no places like that. And even if it's there, it is going to be vandalized, or somebody will use it in a different way, and then people can't access data. So the issue is really data for people to be provided. If they can have places where data is accessible and they can be able to connect their phone freely, then they can participate in that. But for now, the gap is, I think the data is an issue for me. I'm going to stop there. That's because.
No problem. Thank you so much. I know we've had some difficulty there, but we really appreciate your comments and your insights. And Dodana, perhaps then if I could go to you, Leo Honoro, because I know you're also time sensitive here, for your response to the question and perhaps a closing statement.
Thank you, Robin. I think there was an answer that was provided to that question, that zero-based website. I think Parliament needs to invest in something like that, because people already have cell phones, and then they could be able just to access the portfolio committees and whatever else is happening in Parliament. But I guess just in closing, I guess my sentiments are still around public participation being a two-way process. We citizens being involved, and as well as Parliament making an effort to bring those issues to us. And I guess also another important thing is parliamentary oversight. You would remember during the Zondo years, and I quote, Parliament was found sleeping, essentially when all of that happened. I think they really need to be strengthening in that regard, and take serious oversight of things that happen in government, the executive and state-owned enterprises. We need our trains back. We need transit to be functioning. So that's where Parliament has to play a very important role, in getting those things functioning. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, but I have to dash.
No, thank you so much, Honola, and thank you for leaving us with that adage of let's not be asleep at the wheel. We hope not. I think I will go to you, Samantha, and then I'll end off with Brent for your response to the question on the digital divide and maybe closing comments. Samantha.
Thanks. No, I also thought Ndoda covered the response strongly. And so in time, I'm going to hold it there. Brent was saying some things earlier that also felt very strong around it. I wanted to just pick up, and I'm not going to respond to in depth at this time, but just there are a number of comments around spheres of government, about local government and councils, and I would love some kind of conversation around that. I am resistant to the idea of pick one and only go there. The question, I think, for all of us is, in the scheme of the different spheres of government and the kind of duties that different spheres hold, how we strategically ensure that there's a closing of gaps and integration of work. Did do some work with organizations who have taught us, or taught me, and those of us who are doing that project, that when you're located in the council space, out far away, you come to Parliament and there's no place to actually take the issue to Parliament, even if it is a national sphere issue. So there are big gaps there. I think it's a massive conversation about public participation across spheres of government that I'd love to be part of. And then the last comments from me are really just to say that let's not buy into this exceptionalism of Parliament. And that's what all the conversation and the comments are coming through. My view is they're a means to something that they're meant to do. So although our public servants there who are elected seem to embody often, not every single one of them, but embody a sense of entitlement to their position. I have actually heard MPs often saying, we were voted to represent and now we'll make the decision. That's not unheard of at all. So I do think it's up to us as the publics, in our pluralistic ways, to be pushing against that thinking that somehow you've made it and now you're all good. And to do that is a consistent engagement, like I said earlier, not just with the legislature, but actually through those other mechanisms in our public space that are held in the framework of our constitutional democracy.
Thank you so much for that, Samantha. And thank you for reminding us again, as you say, the publics, the pluralistic nature of the society that we are in, and we appreciate your comments. If I can hand over to you, Brent, if you want to, as I think Ilodana did respond to the question quite well on the digital divide, but if you have anything else to say on that and closing comments.
Yeah, look, I mean, thank you for that. I think we have 3 times as many smartphones in South Africa as we have citizens. We have almost 50 million registered smartphone contracts in South Africa. What that means is that almost each and every South African citizen has access to a smartphone. It also means that the overwhelming majority of South African citizens do have, you get about 20% of citizens who have smartphones who have 2 or 3 contracts, so they have 2 or 3 phones with them. So yes, the potential exists. There are officials who say, there are parliamentarians who say that we need to utilize that more strategically. And that is why Parliament has been discussing the issue of zero rating all our websites, but not only our websites. Parliament is saying that all government websites must be zero rated because citizens should not be using their data, their money, to access government information and to access government services. So I think we are on the same footing here as a panel. The only thing we need to do is to find some form of mechanism to get the ball rolling again. Now I do know that from an official perspective, we are discussing it, and we are hoping that we can announce to South Africans that from now onward, you don't have to pay a cent to access information via Parliament's website. And we hope to do something very similar to say that you don't have to access or pay any government departments. So I think I'm going to leave it there, but the discussions are there on those issues. In terms of concluding remarks, I'm just going to repeat again that, look, we have the setup of political party representation in Parliament. But if an official has a constituency that Parliament pays for, and that constituency office is located in your area, as a citizen, you have the right to access that constituency office, irrespective of which political party. In fact, if the member says, I'm not servicing you because you're not a DA or an ANC or an MK supporter, you have the full right to report that MP to the institution itself, because that office then does not represent the political party. As I said, it's an extension of Parliament into our communities. So I think we need to utilize that opportunity. It is there. The things that we have discussed here, I would love to see it going further. So I'm looking forward to your report, because once the report is produced, we can also say this was discussed here. This is what colleagues are proposing. And this is an organization that actually will be meeting more formally with us in terms of trying to get this done, etc. I've seen on the chat there, colleagues are referring to ward committees, an essential aspect of democracy. Your ward committee can contact your constituency office if you don't have the capacity to do it. So all of this integrates at the end of the day to ensure that our democracy is working. And the only way it's going to be working is if all of us play our I'm going to say our constitutional responsibility of ensuring that we help our fellow South Africans so that their voices are heard if they cannot be heard from where they are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brent. And from us here at the organization on doing tax abuse, just to say thank you once again to the participants for joining, for so robustly engaging in the chat, in the Q&A. Allow me to say once again that they will be responded to. You will receive a follow-up. And just as Brent was saying, that these conversations, I think, for me, are always heartening. We are really getting into, I think, the weeds of what it is that we want to see in our political life, which is just life, what we want to see in the representation of our interests. But obviously the work comes in what happens after this. And so our commitment is that you will receive that follow-up from us. You will receive answers to those questions. I think we can try as far as possible as well that some of the links to some of the work that our panelists and other colleagues are doing be included in that email. Just to say that the organization that Indodana represents, Civil Society Unmuted. In the chat, they have noted that they are going to be doing a nationwide training and workshop. They are going to keep people informed about those programs. They've also dropped the link to their Facebook in there as well. I would say as well, if you don't already, please follow the work of the Parliament of South Africa on its various social media platforms. Brent did mention as well that in terms of youth, it has the biggest following. Correct, Brent? Is it that's on YouTube? If you can just correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. So please follow them on those channels. Same with Equal Education and with Open Secrets as well. Engage as much as you can. And then from OUTA's side, I know it's a odd follow on when we spoke about the digital divide, but we do have a new tool that we launched early this year called ParliMeter, where you can follow the work of your parliamentarians, bills that are currently in progress. You can even track the attendance of your MPs. So, an excellent tool for oversight and accountability. And obviously, you can also follow out on its various social media channels. But thank you once again for an excellent discussion. And there definitely will be more to come, I think, from all of us here today. But thank you so much. And please do be on the lookout for that follow up email.